Welcome to the BTS Presents show.
I'm Brian Schulman, I'm the producer. We're currently doing segments on Santa Cruz County and Silicon Valley real estate behind the scenes. Thanks for watching.
Hi, I'm Candace Bradfield, broker and owner of Bradfield & Associates, and past president of our Santa Cruz County Association of Realtors. I want to thank you for joining BTS Presents.
Hello, thanks for joining again. I'm Datta Khalsa, and I have with me on this show two of the foremost proponents of finding solutions to both housing costs and also homelessness in the county. So thanks for joining us this evening. I suppose if we could have you start things off. You recently retired from public service officially, but you're very much active in these issues now. Is that correct?
That's correct. And for quite a while, I've been working on issues related to homelessness and have worked with an organization called Smart Solutions to Homelessness. Mm-hmm. But somewhat out of that work, I've gotten more involved in the larger affordable housing issue and have been spending a lot of time this year trying to work with a bunch of other people in the community to come up with a new funding source to build affordable housing and build housing for people who've been homeless. So that's kept me very busy lately.
So you see that as the main solution is building supply essentially and collaborating. I understand there's a couple of active projects, two large ones that I've heard of with churches that are cooperating with some developers. Are those part of what you're addressing?
Well, in general, we find even though there are some ways that there are other subsidies to help, like churches donating land would be a classic example of that, to build truly affordable housing, but those opportunities are pretty limited, so it usually also takes some kind of funding. And so I've been really focused not exclusively on that funding issue, but that is where I am right now, putting the greatest amount of energy, because there seems to be a lot of agreement about that issue, even as there's some disagreement about some other housing solutions.
Yeah, and I read last week in the Mercury about some successful housing that's being done in the East Bay using a community housing land trust, and I understand that there does exist a community housing land trust for Santa Cruz County, but it's not currently that active. Can you I suppose explain why?
Well, I don't really know, and I just know that I've seen its name in existence for many years in Santa Cruz, and trying to probably raise funds so that some land could be acquired to then become the site for affordable housing, but I don't know I haven't seen a specific outcome from that effort. So I think, but it would be hugely valuable, because again, that becomes the way. There's a subsidy, just the free, the donated land that makes the cost of creating that affordable housing so much less.
So I guess what programs are you currently most excited about, or what would you like to put forth for people to be aware of?
Well, I'm particularly excited about this proposed ballot measure, which will create a $140 million bond fund for Santa Cruz County, and the lion's share of that would be there for local jurisdictions to allocate to very specific affordable rental housing projects.
And the measure, what measure number is it?
It doesn't have a number yet.
Not yet. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned. But we do, if everything goes well, it should be on the ballot in November. It seems on track to be on the ballot in November. And
who's authoring that?
Pardon?
Who's authoring the ballot?
Well, it's actually an organization that I'm part of called Affordable Housing Santa Cruz County. And it's a coalition that has literally the full range of people in the county because housing is such a compelling issue across the board. There's people from the Farm Bureau involved on one end of the political spectrum, all the way to tenant rights advocates and everybody in between. A lot of the healthcare industry, real estate people, home builders, both nonprofit and for-profit developers. All the human services sector.
So finally something everyone agrees on.
Yeah, pretty much. We're pretty darn close on that. There has to be some opposition somewhere, but we haven't come across a lot yet. And it really is something that people can get behind, just because I think there's a recognition when the state used to have what's called redevelopment. and it was a source of funds for local government to do affordable housing, and that's gone now. And so I think a lot of people who look at the issue go, oh, if we're going to continue to do what we used to be able to do, we have to come up with a new funding source, and that's what this is an opportunity to do.
And I think historically, the problem was that the county hadn't had a housing element, and a lot of those kinds of programs aren't available until you actually file a compliant housing element. Is it worth even exploring that? Because the counter to that was, well, that was completely unreasonable for a place with the limited resources and natural limitations on development that we have.
It seems like, I think the county now does have an approved housing element, and all the jurisdictions do. So they're kind of poised to be able to create affordable housing.
So then where's the funding?
Well, that's what I mean. They're now that state mechanism that used to be there when it was dissolved by the legislature a few years ago. And now I think David could probably fill us in a little bit about the new prospect for state funding.
Okay, well, David Foster, Habitat for Humanity.
David Foster with Habitat for Humanity, Monterey Bay.
Yeah.
And we serve Santa Cruz and Monterey counties. And we've been around since, about 26 years now. We're probably one of the smaller of the affordable housing developers. We've built about 50 homes in that time, in the 26 years. So we're small potatoes compared to some of the larger groups that build larger scale rental housing projects. Habitat's a little different because we build using volunteer labor. About 80% of the labor is provided by volunteers, which is one way you make your homes a little more affordable. That used to be enough to make a difference, that if you had volunteers, you could make something affordable simply by getting together as a community and volunteering to build it. That was back in the 70s when Habitat first got started. And now land costs are probably 60% of the development costs. So your volunteers are helpful, but you need a major infusion of real, actual cash.
Well, then you've got also
to
20%
buy that land.
20% for materials too, right? Do you get any donations of that?
We get some donation of materials. Probably about 20 or 30% of our materials are donated by local companies and larger companies as well, national companies. But I think in the last 5 or 6 years, federal funding has just plummeted. State funding and the redevelopment agency have gone almost to zero in a lot of ways. And the local funding, the cities and counties have been hard pressed to find the money. They used to have access to that redevelopment agency money that had a 20% set aside that had to be spent on affordable housing purposes. So with that gone, communities have just, their housing programs have dried up. Most cities and counties now don't run housing repair programs the way they used to run. And so the small nonprofit groups that are still out there are really suffering. So I think what's finally coming around, and it's taken a number of years. The redevelopment agency closed in 2011. It's taken until now to finally get on the books bonds that are ready to come out and be voted on. So the big one here is the bond in Santa Cruz County for $140 billion. Million dollars. And,
we can just move that number to a B. That would be nice.
And that can really make the difference. There is also Proposition 1, which is going to be on the ballot. It's a state ballot to bring in additional funding at the state level. And it's $1 billion.
No, $4 billion.
I'm sorry, $4 billion. And what's I think important to say is that when the county is running one bond program, the state has another one, and the truth is we need both of them. If you have the state bond in place, usually that means then individual affordable housing developers have to apply to that money, and they usually have to have a match of funds to be competitive in that application. Where do they get the match from if the local community doesn't have any money?
Right.
So that's
that'll
where
work in
that's where
concert.
the local bond is so critical, to have that here so that we can do the match that's required to have us have access then to state funding.
So you've got one larger project that you recently announced. Is that moving forward? I think it's in the South County area, or
Well, we're currently building a project called Los Esteros Court. It's in the Live Oak area. It's a 7-unit subdivision, and we're
is that going to be the biggest one that you guys have done?
that will be the biggest that
Yeah.
we've done so far, and we're about a month or two away from starting construction on the last 2 of those units in that project, and then we'll be finished with that in another year from now. The last 2, one of them is going to be a fully wheelchair accessible, ADA compliant 3-bedroom home. So
Wow.
that's exciting for us to make that unit available. And then the very last one is going to be a veterans build, which will be for a 3-bedroom home for a family that has a member that's a veteran.
And do you already have people lined up for those, I imagine?
We're taking applications.
How long's that list, I wonder?
You know, it's always, you never know what you're going to get when you get applications, and that's the heartbreaking part of running a program like that, is that you get a lot more applications than you can serve.
Yeah. And I think development often ties in, and bonds often tie into transportation bonuses. I know in a fund that I am active in is participating in a development down in Fresno, where they have development funds that are available and grants that are available if you're within a transportation improvement district. Can you speak a little, because transportation has been a big topic with rail trail and other issues here. Is there any live transportation district money that's being discussed?
I don't think there's certainly not any local funding that way, but there are federal grants that are very difficult to get that will facilitate transit-oriented development. And one project that the city and the Santa Cruz Metropolitan Transit District have talked about for several years is to build a 100% affordable project right adjacent to the existing transit center in downtown Santa Cruz.
Wow.
And that's the kind of project that could at least compete for a federal grant like that. But I don't think we're going to count on that. I think if this housing bond passes, for instance, both the state and the local one, those are the kinds of funds that are probably going to be more immediately available to put together a project like that.
And it's a process too. I mean, you put your application in, I think around April or May every year, they kind of announce, okay, you're on the final list, and then it's like watching
That's right.
some TV show or something like that to find out who's
Open the
winner.
envelope.
Yeah, open
Did
the
you get
envelope.
the yes letter or the no letter? Right.
Yeah, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
But one other thing I'd just say about the transportation in relation to affordable housing is generally a lot of the kind of housing we're talking about would be built on transportation corridors.
Well, right. The city's plan is basically along the 3 major corridors for high-rise. Well, not high-rise, but for us,
Yeah, 3 stories.
3 stories, 4 stories, and
right.
people are hopping mad. But
Right. But what I mean is whether it could be on those corridors, but even downtown, for instance, that's where
I think Owen Lawler's just proposed a 6-story development.
Right,
at
right
the
down
Taco
on
Bell.
Pacific,
Right.
But my point is that those are the kind of locations that are going to be zoned already to have multifamily residential. And that's good, because you do want people who are in these kind of developments to have access to public transportation. So that's already kind of in concept, everything's in place for that. It doesn't mean that every site is perfect, and I think each community is going to have to work out exactly where things are appropriate. But I think there's at least the zoning is such that it's going to be inclined to have people near public transportation in these affordable projects.
I think one of the things about transportation that's related to housing, at least for me, I see affordable housing as an environmental issue. And
How
many
so?
people say, affordable housing and growth is something that we should be opposed to if it means, growth in our community and higher density. And the truth is that the transportation problems that we're having right now is partially because
The
of the
affordable
lack
housing's
of affordable
40 miles
housing.
away or
The
worse.
the people that work in Santa Cruz who are commuting from Watsonville, Salinas, Gilroy to get to their jobs here. And ask any employer, and that's what they'll tell you. They're having a hard time getting people because it's a 45-minute commute to get to town, to get to work.
Right.
And if we can build affordable housing here for the workforce that's working right here, and we can get rid of that grid of transportation problems.
Well, that plus these orange bikes that are showing up all across town.
That's right.
They're all off the racks. It seems like the demand has just been, and I see them, wandered way down. I'm like, what's one of these doing down in Capitola? But
No, they're very popular.
Yeah.
And I do, I think a lot of people, I've talked to some people who are using them to commute to work because it just really works so well for them.
Yeah.
It's such a quick ride for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it's not expensive, and then you don't have to deal with it other than just hopping on and locking
Yeah.
it up.
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's I guess it started with the white bikes back in Amsterdam, and now here, I think Santa Cruz has always kind of wanted to be Amsterdam.
That's right.
But Amsterdam obviously has different approaches to a lot of social programs and things that I think might be popular with many of the voters here. But what's it been like after being in public office? There's probably pros and cons to how you're able to get things done now. Has it been harder or easier, would you say?
On balance, I'm finding perhaps a little bit easier, at least in this respect, that I get to focus on what matters to me the most, which is right now affordable housing and homelessness. As a city council member, I certainly had some time to work on those issues and tried to carve out a substantial amount of time, but I had to deal with every issue that was before the city, and there's a lot of other ones. So in that respect, I've really found, I find it pretty satisfying, for instance, to work on this local affordable housing bond. I have the time to work on that every day, and I would not have if I was an elected official now.
And Habitat for Humanity, you solely are dealing with providing housing. Are you addressing homelessness aside from in other ways? Do you help build shelters or any things like that?
Pretty much, Habitat in its history has focused on home ownership, affordable housing for low-income households. We're moving away from that, or not moving away from that, but expanding a little bit to do some different programs. One of them in the Pajaro area, we're doing now a home repair program, which is a new and exciting thing for
You
us.
should have a film
It's
crew show up with
very
the repair
different.
guys. And
Yeah, yeah,
It's
we
like,
should.
yeah.
And then here in Santa Cruz County, we have a new program that I think is unique in the nation. It's called My House, My Home. It's a program where we're partnering with the city and the county, and then partnering also with low-income senior homeowners who are at risk of losing their home because they can't make the mortgage payment or because of accessibility problems with the home. They can't make it up the stairs. They need ramps and grab bars and whatnot. And usually they call them aging in place programs that will come in and put your grab bars in and do a ramp. But that doesn't solve the problem for a senior who can't make their mortgage payment. So what we're offering is a program where we actually will help them build an accessory dwelling unit on their property. Then they have the option. They can either downsize into the smaller unit and rent out their main house, or continue to live in the main house and rent out the accessory dwelling unit.
So both aging in place, basically.
And that gives them some stabilizing additional income. Whichever one they decide to rent out, they agree to rent it out at an affordable rate. So it's not only helping that senior keep their home and age in place, but it also provides some new rental affordable rental opportunities.
Basically helps them open a business and stimulates the economy, so to speak.
Yeah.
How much of your funding is government subsidy and how much of it is private?
Well, we've, both the city and the county have been very generous in providing usually land. And the city's provided a number of sites to us over the years at below market or just donating. The Los Esteros homes that we're building in Live Oak, that was land that was donated from the county using the last of the redevelopment agency money and land to build those, or to at least pay for the land cost on that. And we're currently in the process of applying for a subdivision approval from the county for an 11-unit project that will also be in the Live Oak area, and that's on land that we're hoping will be donated by the county to help make the units affordable.
Could I just mention one other thing about that Habitat has done? They have touched on the issue of homelessness a little bit in the past, because I used to work at the Homeless Services Center, and I'm guessing the time frame, about 10 years ago, maybe a little longer, they volunteers from Habitat actually did the internal building work to create what's called the Paul Lee Loft Shelter. And so there was Habitat volunteers made that happen.
And then a year ago, we also volunteered and did the repainting of the interior of the what's the family shelter?
The Reveille Family Shelter.
Family Shelter
there by Costco.
We did the paint work in the interior there and helped also with building the dental operatory
That's right.
there.
That's cool.
And
But getting back to funding, have you had much from private donors as far
well,
as that?
see, that's the hard part. If we had a stable stream of funding that was available, at least that we could apply for through the county, through the city, through the federal government or the state, and that's what we're trying to get with these bonds. But other than the land, usually we're looking to private foundations and private individuals.
Well, I was reading elsewhere, there's some of these corporations, these billionaire benefactors are coming under heat because there are these new tax write-off vehicles where they quote unquote donate millions or billions of dollars under a vehicle. It's called, I think it's a DAF, a donor something.
Donor advised fund.
Donor advised fund,
Yeah.
and then they're not accountable for it. Not to name names, but I think the GoPro guy was Nick was cited as an example, and they checked the records, and the only thing they could see from these large amounts of sums that were done was a donation to the Bonnie Doon Elementary School for some classroom or something like that. But they literally couldn't. So I wonder if you could go to a list of those registered DAFs and say, okay, you're looking for somewhere to put your funds. How about, how could you find a more, worthy need and a great front page place for them to say, hey, look, I helped this. Just saying.
Most of our donors, I think, have a personal connection to us or feel a personal connection.
Yeah.
We also get donations from the people that are volunteering, and that put in their donation that way and then send us a check as well. You never know.
What's your annual budget, just to give an idea of the scale?
Oh boy, we're under $1 million.
Wow, so that's small potatoes for a Silicon
We are.
Valley benefactor.
And we're because we build kind of house by house or 2 or 3 homes at a time. We're not going to be the solution to all of the housing problems.
Right.
We're fitting into a special niche. And one of the things that we found, although there's groups, larger groups like Mid-Peninsula Housing and Eden Housing that does the larger scale projects, if the county or the city has a small lot that's maybe good for 1 or 2 units, those groups are going to look at it and say it's too small for us. We
So you
can't
feel
get
that-
involved.
you feel that
and we
niche.
say, well,
We'll take that.
we'll take that one. We're interested in something small scale, and that's why this My House, My Home work works so well. That we're working right with seniors. We're not actually involved in homeowners or in purchasing land in that case. We're simply working with a senior homeowner to help them keep their home, creating some new affordable rental housing, and not having to get involved in the land, which is such a huge nut to crack in terms of the cost.
Could I just mention that? Reminded me of something else that's really important. I think the accessory dwelling units in general are one of the most popular forms of affordable housing.
Right, because you already own the land.
People, and it also doesn't, for people who are concerned about big time growth, it just doesn't feel like that. It's just adding, very well spaced out single units around and well distributed around the community. And so this local affordable housing bond has really embraced that, and we've actually named, helping homeowners build accessory dwelling units as one of the possible uses of the funding in the bond. And the way that would work is that it would provide a super low interest loan to someone who might not otherwise build the ADU, and then they'd say, wow, with this really good loan, I can go ahead and do that. And they are just agreeing to rent it at a lower rent. And then often the payback is that they don't need to make payments back until the property is sold.
And this is within just the city limits, or in the whole county?
This is we're creating the funding source with the bond that would then be available to the county and all of the cities. If they choose to use the funding that way, they'd be able to set up a program. The county has a pilot program like this right now, but it's got just a tiny bit of money in it. And we're really, this is a time when accessory dwelling units are really there's a lot of interest.
There's a lot of interest. I think one of the stumbling blocks, at least in the county, when you're in Soquel Creek Water District, they require you to have a separate water meter at a cost of $43,500, and there goes everyone's interest. As soon as I say, well, you've got that, and it suddenly goes from feasible to not. So is there any work? I think at the state level there was a proposal to, because they're a private agency, they're not a government agency. So is there anything that could be done locally to go to them and just say, look, can you make an exception for ADUs? Is there any effort being done?
I believe there's probably more effort going on at the state level to remedy that, because in the city of Santa Cruz, as a counterpoint, that regulation doesn't apply, and ADUs can be built without a separate water meter
because the state said that it was not allowable.
So it may be that will change for separate water districts like Soquel Creek.
But
I'm not sure what's going.
You don't have any leverage with them.
We don't have any.
Hey,
but we are. Well, I think the one leverage we'll have is as the other local government entities are really elevating their efforts to build ADUs, and that's the big stumbling block. There'll be pressure from other local governments. Say, hey, you're the one place that is creating an obstacle to us moving forward. So, the other thing that I should say quickly is that even though, the Soquel Creek Water District is in a difficult situation, but I think they're moving along now towards enough of a solution that they may not be under quite so much pressure to limit every water meter, and that would also help a lot.
Well, and they have problems of their own. They're getting a lot of neighborhood opposition to their treatment plant proposed.
Oh, right.
There. So
one of the neat things is the county has, I think, a cutting edge website that you can go to now around ADUs. You plop in your address and it'll tell you what districts you're in, what water district you're in, help you calculate what your costs are, help you calculate how large your ADU can be. It's an amazing site, and they've really put some effort into that and rewriting their manual and their ordinances for encouraging ADUs. So
I think it comes back to what we touched on at the beginning. Is I think a lot of good minds have come together, and people, it's heartwarming to see when people agree, whether they're in the private sector or whether they're on opposite sides of other issues, that we could actually solve a problem by making affordable housing actually affordable to provide, ironically.
And it's really happening because, unfortunately, there really is a crisis for so many people, and that is really a significant problem. But the good news is that when you get that kind of crisis, that's when people extend themselves and kind of look more to come together to solve a problem, and I think we're getting there.
well, which would be a very cool vision. Well, thank you both for your work and for joining us, and thank you for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you on an upcoming segment on some other worthy issue. Thank you.
Thanks for watching the BTS Presents show.